right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuebor Historic Events live stream supporting the Neuner event in August of this year. I want to say hi and thanks to everybody who's joining in with us. I've got Andrew Hufftailing from the 9th Ohio, A Living History with us. And I've got Andrew Roscoe from Tuebor Historic Events, and of course I'm Will Eichler. Let's set the evening up. Andrew, let me set up with you and ask why Prussian drill?
Well, when we talk about Germans in the Civil War, there were over 200,000 that served, and the most common is a single or pairs of individuals in a native-born regiment. And you might have had several, say, a company or two companies in a native-born regiment. You also may have had all German regiments, and when you get to talking about the German regiments, they're most often they're placed in a brigade of native-born regiments. And so the 9th Ohio and the 32nd Indiana are two of these examples. And so the question is, several times in some of the primary sources, which we'll get to, they make reference to a Prussian form of drill that they used. And so the question becomes, is this even possible? How do they fit in with the rest of the army? So that's sort of the questions that we're addressing tonight.
Cool. Great. Andy, let me let you start with any opening comments as well as we go forward and look at the Prussian manual we're going to talk about this evening.
Sure. Well, one of the things I think with the Civil War is we find more and more is that a lot of the things that we've always taken for granted come from surface level readings of the official records and sources like that. There are things that have been put out there that we've always just accepted that historians don't always dig below the surface. I mean, the Civil War is such a broad, diverse subject that there's always room open for historians to look at better information and to challenge these existing narratives. And I've read this paper that Andrew put together a year ago. I know, Will, you did too. And I've been fascinated by this. I thought this was really, really interesting. And what I liked is that Andrew really went to a greater understanding at the lower levels, like the really specific sources, to challenge some of the things, the presumptions of historians.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, as we get started, let me say good evening. I see a bunch of people chirping in to be with us. I see 21 faces watching right now. Jake has stepped in to say hi. Eric has, and so has Brandon out in Colorado. If you get a chance, use the chat function, gang. We're just getting to the point where with COVID, with vaccines coming out, we're able to start thinking about moving. We're thinking about Blakely. Ed Wilson just chirped in with a question here that I'm going to throw at you, Andy, and this is something we're going to deal with later on in the discussion, but I think it's a good thing. Ed, it is dark early in England, good grief. But Ed says, fascinating. Didn't the Iron Brigade also have varying drill manuals within the brigade? Andy, I'm not going to even let Andrew go to this one. Ready? Go.
All right. Yes, Ed, as always, I appreciate your keen historical instincts. This was actually already a discussion point for us this evening. Yeah, this isn't people. One of the big misconceptions, and one of the reasons people thought that the Prussian drill wasn't really used in the Civil War, is this idea that brigades have to have some homogeneous style of drill to it. The problem is we have some really great examples, including famously the Iron Brigade, of brigades that have varying battalion drills going on at the same time. Within the Iron Brigade, we know the 24th Michigan was using Hardee's drills. We know the Wisconsin regiments were most likely using Chandler's drill, which is a variation of Scott's heavy infantry drill. And we think the 19th Indiana was probably also using Hardee's. So you have different battalion drills going on at the brigade drill. But the real thing here is that the basis of maneuver at the brigade level is Scott's Volume 3. And so it really doesn't matter what battalion drill you're using, as long as you can put your battalion where it needs to for the evolutions of the line.
Great.
And I know we'll hit it on further, but yes, Ed.
Yeah, so no, that's where it is. Craig Stephen has said hello from Washington. Craig, great to have you. Of course, William P. Green Jr. says, Huck is here, all is well. And Andrew Potter says hello. So, gang, it's great to see faces here. We're going to start to be together, I hope, this year, and it's good to see people chiming in. I'm just sitting here realizing, even not having done Civil War Digital Digest live streams for a while, how much I'm enjoying just getting to be with you guys, even though I'm here in Chicago, Andrew's in the Cincinnati area, and Andy's down at Naval Air Station Whiting Field, or something very close to that on the military terms.
Nope, you got it right.
All right, that's one in a row for me then. So, hey, let's move on. It is later in the evening. Let's not take too much time. Andrew, let me open up with you, and we use this term Prussian drill. Talk to us. Let's head in and let's discuss what Prussian drill is here. When we let's define our terms. So let me let you go on that.
Well, the common understanding among most historians that have written on the topic is they refer to it as Prussianisms, which I think is a really solid term. It generally refers to the bugle calls that they use to maneuver the troops around. They were generally better trained in skirmish drill, and they were more used to using heavier skirmish formations, and then the German language, which there's sort of a divide whether the actual commands were done in German or whether the commands were in English but the instructions were in German, and both of those are the case with different other units. But as far as the 9th Ohio, that I think it comes from when you read "We Were the 9th," they do make several references to the usage of the Prussian drill, and in the beginning they say, when we re-enlisted from 3 months to 3 years, so this is end of May 61. We retained the right to elect officers, to be commanded in German, and to follow the Prussian method of training. And that's what the English says. And he has a footnote in the back that says basically there's no record left of what the Prussian drill is, which is, if somebody has it, please let us know what the 9th Ohio used exactly. But we're never going to know exactly what they used. But he says it seems to have differed from the American more in the language than the drill or the tactics. But my question from there became, if that's the case, if it was just them doing the same thing as everybody else, except we add our little spin on it, then why did they write so much about it? And why did other regiments that were near or served with them, why did they write about it? And so that's kind of where the basis came from.
And Andrew, I think an important thing to articulate too is we're not talking about the author of We Were the 9th, the original author of De Neuner, Grebner. Right. We're talking about the person who translated the notes from the Troutman, who translated 1987, something like that.
Correct. Thank you. Yeah. That's a very important point. And then on top of that, De Neuner wasn't written by somebody who was a member of the regiment. They hired a writer to write it, and so I think that says something right there, that they told this person that they were paying to write, keep on telling them about the Prussian drill. I mean, they mention it 3 or 4 different times, just in this one book. So, So go ahead.
I know, I was going to say, great. I'll take just a second. And Michael Comer says, I'm here too for what it's worth. Mike, you took me under wing at my first campaigner event ever, and were my big brother in my first campaigner. It's worth a hell of a lot to have you here. Welcome. Robert Kronig says, hello from the Trans-Mississippi. He has a question that, Robert, I will come back to a little bit later. I want to focus a question. You said Andrew, that we will never know exactly what the Ninth Ohio used, given that we don't have an extant copy of a manual used by one of the officers there. What will we use for de Neuner in August?
So what we decided to do is, instead of starting with an American manual and trying to Germanize it, we definitely don't think that's what they did. And so we started with the Prussian drill manual, the Preußische Exercitium, that they mention in We Were the Ninth. And it was published in 1847. Their original drill master, Willich, August Willich, that we already talked about, likely never even saw this drill manual because he was well out of the army by then. But the manual doesn't differ much from what he would have used.
Okay, and let me cut in here, Andrew, just a second. Yeah. Gang, you are seeing an image of Willich here on screen. And as I come back, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to say the name of that drill manual one more time.
So the full name is the Preußische Exerzierreglement, and it translates to the Prussian drill manual.
Okay, now let me stop Andrew real quick and say, in full disclosure, Andrew and I are both Michigan State Spartans, so we're mourning our losses from basketball this week, and Andy, sitting in the middle, can get over it as a University of Michigan person, but Andrew has the marks of being a TA in the German department, where I took German and did pretty miserably at it. So, setting going forward, seeing as Andrew has to double say the name of this manual, we've been referring to it as PER. So most of the time on Facebook communication, on other stuff talking about this drill, you're going to see it abbreviated as capital P, capital E, capital R. That's not a typo, somebody missing per. That is an acronym for this manual. So, Andrew, you talk about going against regulations here. Would you talk a little bit about some of the arguments and rebuttals about this?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the first question that always comes up is if the regulations say that we're supposed to do one thing, then they obviously must have done it. Back then, I think that's looking at things with sort of a modern view. Back then, the phrase "citizen soldier" was a real thing, and the members of the Ninth Ohio were very keen on if not using that phrase, sort of embodying what it meant. And when the Ninth Ohio was raised, they specifically recruited officers and NCOs who had previously served, whether it was in the Revolutionary Army or the Prussian Army or other armies. Their sergeant major was a member of the French Foreign Legion, they were extremely well drilled. The idea that, early on, the newspapers and sort of the hometowns were writing, maybe puff pieces about some of the regiments. That may have been true for a lot of them, but the Ninth Ohio has multiple sources, not just from German language newspapers and their own history, but also regiments that were at Camp Dennison with them, regiments like the 6th Ohio and the 10th Ohio, who themselves, when they got done with West Virginia, were considered very good regiments. And so, it goes back to when you talk about the evolutions of the line. If you're trying to raise an army very quickly, if you've got a battalion of guys who can get where they need to go and get there quick, maybe you don't care so much about how they get there.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead, Andy.
No, I think this goes to what we already broached earlier, is that, very interestingly, we know that Scott's Volume 3, which is the Evolutions of the Line for the Army, is the standard drill manual for brigade, division, corps to army, and so, at the early part of the war, until Casey's Volume 3 supplants it in late 1862. And one of the great things in Andrew's research is that we know Willich with the 32nd Indiana and officers with the 9th at Ohio are using Scott's Volume 3 in conjunction with PER. So we know that they're fitting this battalion drill into the larger scope of the Army. And I mean, think about the U.S. Army at the beginning of the war. You have some battalions are using Scott's. You have some using the derivatives, either Chandler's, Baxter's, or Gillam's manual. You have Hardy's manual, of course. And then you actually have regiments using straight-out French Chasseur manuals. So there's a plethora of drill manuals going on all at the same time here. But the nice thing is there is a common language, and it's at the brigade level. So it really, truthfully, doesn't matter about this battalion drill. And I think that's one of the things that we see here is that there's comments from various senior officers, whether Schofield at one point or other brigade division commanders, about how they stand out. But then they really realize that this drill, even though it's exotic compared to the other drill manuals that are slight variations on each other, it still fits into the overall scheme of the Army, and it isn't a detriment to the Army's efficacy.
Absolutely, and the fantastic beard that we're seeing right here is Major General Schofield. So let me take us to another officer to talk about that, and these are good names. It's the Fighting McCooks. Andrew, would you talk with me about how they fit into the story here?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of the argument for, well, what would happen if the 9th Ohio, did the Prussian drill against orders, and that's Robert McCook. He unfortunately was killed when he was really young, 1862, and didn't have the entire war to sort of fill out his legacy, but. He was the second-born son of the head of one of the more influential families in Washington, the McCook family, and his father, Dan, they were worth quite a bit of money, and he was a clerk at the time for the U.S. House of Representatives. And when Fort Sumter was fired on, he actually was one of the ones that was raising a company of men to protect the White House in the initial commotion. They were quartered in the East Room of the White House. And everybody knows the younger brother, Alexander McDowell McCook. He commanded a corps, and he graduated from West Point. But I want to draw your attention to his older brother, George Wythe McCook. And he doesn't get a whole lot of press because he didn't really serve on the front lines. He did a lot of recruiting, but he was eventually named the Adjutant General of the state of Ohio. But to show you sort of the inner workings or interconnectivity of these families, George Wythe McCook was the law partner of Edwin Stanton, who ended up becoming the Secretary of War. And they were law partners at Stanton and McCook. They had offices in 4 states in the District of Columbia, and I believe they were the ones that defended Dan Sickles during his trial. But what's interesting is if you look down the family line, George Wythe McCook was Edwin Stanton's best man at his wedding, and their younger brother, Robert and George and Alexander's younger brother, was actually named Edwin Stanton McCook. So
wow.
The question becomes, if you're going to complain about what Robert McCook is doing, who are you going to complain to? And there are several instances over his very short, service as regimental commander and then brigade commander, where he's ordered to take the men out on drill, and he just schedules laundry day instead. He when they're delivered beer in Corinth, they say they have to be on the line at noon, and he steps aside and says, hey, if you don't serve these men this beer that they just got delivered, the riot that you're going to have to put down is going to be a lot bigger than just letting them drink it. And at one point, he threatens to take the 9th Ohio home when they are, I believe it was Thomas West Sherman. When he was in command of the division, they were doing drills, and they say even back at his time, they were going after the drill, and McCook threatened to turn around and take us back to Pittsburgh Landing. And that's just the sort of guy McCook was, like it or not. And I just I find it, who do you turn to in that case?
Good. The photo we see here is Thomas Sherman. So as we're meeting different faces out of history there, the pronounced forehead, this is Mr. Sherman. So, well, let me ask you this. By way of transition, doesn't this cause confusion on the battlefield to be working with multiple languages within one brigade?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's one the native-born commanders ask themselves. And you mentioned Schofield earlier. When he takes over in spring of '63, he institutes brigade and division drills. And just a side note, everybody knows the quote "drill, drill, drill, drill" from the Ken Burns series, but they make a note that this is actually the first time that they had ever done brigade or division drills, and this is spring '63. And so when this goes on, everybody expects them to fail, and they do at first when they start these. But so does everybody else, because this is the first time that they've ever done this. But they say we were able to pick it up very quickly because by our manual, and they say specifically nach unserem Reglement, by our manual, the only knowledge needed was the bugle calls. We speak the language of music, and so all that was needed, and they explain this is for the regimental commander to get whatever their order is, and he communicates to the bugler standing right next to him, and the regiment has not one, not two, but 10 buglers, one for each company, plus the battalion bugler. So that's a bit of a surprise, I'm sure, for a lot of you guys. But there are several instances where they refer to this many buglers, and so they made a lot of noise. But this is one of the sort of the hallmarks.
Well, and there's also the situation where you may not be using all 11 buglers, except for one of them is speaking to the company commander, where one is playing a call at regimental level, and the other 10 are saying, "Sir, we need to do this right now." So that's right, and it does specifically say in the PER that you don't, if you're basically standing right there, you don't necessarily need to blow the bugle every time. You can do by voice command too. So, so that's how they were able to translate the calls all the way down from division down to the regimental and company levels. Good.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, is one thing I think with this too is, I know Andrew and I have had this discussion in the past, is I think it does really mean, though, that the battalion commander becomes a linchpin, because he's translating English orders and music, and so he's dealing with this Scott's tactics, or later Casey's tactics, at the brigade level, and he has to then pull out whatever the battalion drill is, the battalion drill maneuver, to make that work, for the evolution of the line. And not that, that's something every battalion commander has to do, but he just does have that added barrier of, I'm dealing with potentially giving orders in German, whether it's to the music or whether it's directly to the company commanders or the battalion. But you are having to do kind of that code switching of, I'm speaking English and Scots up higher, and I'm speaking German and PER down lower. It does make a linchpin. Thankfully, the 9th Ohio and the 32nd Ohio both had fantastic commanders. Famously in the 9th, Kammerling was an outstanding regimental commander for 2 years, But I do see how that probably, if anything, could have been the linchpin of where a failure point would have happened, because that is a friction point right there.
Absolutely. Well, gents, let me pull us out to the messages. There's a lot of discussions about hairstyles going on there. I see people interacting with each other and chatting through the chat, which is fantastic. Craig Stevens says, Andy, go Navy. So a shout out for the service there. A whole bunch of people just interacting, which is fantastic. Ed, I haven't forgotten your question. We'll come back to it a little bit later. Huck says, I've read McCook, Nebraska was named in honor of Alexander McDowell McCook, a brigadier in general in the Union Army during the American Civil War, post-war honor. Pardon me. Elsie Gam asks, wonder if how the music hall tunes varied from Prussian to English manuals. LC, it's a great question. I'm going to put a pause on that because it doesn't hit tonight, but that is something as we get ready for De Neuner, you will be hearing more about. So if you're not registered already, we'd love to have you register and come join us in August, and we'll talk afterward about how we discuss that ahead of time, but you won't be hearing about that at the event. You'll be experiencing that at the event, hearing about it ahead of time to make you better ready. Rob Carter is just responding to you, Andy. He says that's exactly what the commander did with Polyglot 39th New York Garibaldi Guard. Colonel Dietzi, and I'm sure I'm butchering the name there, was the linchpin. So... Ed Wilson here, I'll bring this one in. English and Scots. One involves more epitaphs and colorful language, and the other is Scots. So Ed is in fine form, really, really middle of the night. Thrilled to have you with us and the rest of you guys. Let me say this, and I'm going to say this by way of joke here. Jake Nolan says polyglot is a fantastic word. Rob Carter is going to help me out. Dutasi is how you pronounce the colonel of the Garibaldi Guard. Dutasi. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to transition us to the next part of discussing how some of this happens in some of the language by saying I was always taught a joke in college, and that was they say there are 3 types of German spoken today. One is High German or Hoch German, one is Swiss German, and one is the German that they teach in American colleges, which drove me rather nuts in college, and it is what it is. So, but given that, Andrew, let's talk about Germans all speaking... Sorry, I just saw Rob Carter's most recent comment. Sorry, yes, dear. Andrew, talk us a little bit about German speaking German, please.
Yeah, I mean, so another sort of counterpoint to this would be the idea that, you know, with all of the different dialects that Germans speak, and you can go to Germany today, you know, 2 people that are only separated by a few dozen kilometers might have a hard time understanding each other depending on where they're from. And that certainly does make a difference, especially if you're talking about Germans that are very, very recent immigrants. But as we discussed in previous live streams, you know, a lot of these guys had been here for 10 or more years. Most of them had been here for more than 5 years. And, you know, while the dialects do play, you know, a part in it, that was actually addressed by, you know, sort of playwrights and newspaper editors in Germany well before the Civil War. You know, Hochdeutsch wasn't sort of an official thing, is my understanding at that time. But if you look at newspapers, especially specifically in Cincinnati, they had a thriving German language newspaper community. And, you know, all throughout the United States, there were many, many German language newspapers that were printed. And most of them, when you read them, there are a few that are different, but most of them, when you read them, anybody who's taken college German in the United States can recognize it as pretty close to Hochdeutsch. And so, you know, something that people won't understand isn't going to sell very well, and so they sort of already had worked through that. Now, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, Andrew, too, and I mean, I think an important part is that the leavening of this community in Cincinnati. I mean, I know you're the Cincinnati guy, like, you know, these people weren't just there for like a year, you know, they weren't fresh off the boat. Like, they had formed this really vibrant pan-German community in a way that wasn't even existing in Germany at the time. And I wonder to what extent that helped them leaven out all of those dialects as they all kind of forged their own identity as German Americans versus just Germans.
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly aid societies that were you might have the Saxon aid society or something along those lines where they were specifically directed towards people from different regions, but a lot of times it was for people who had just arrived there. And with chain migration, you would often have that where you'd have one wave from one place and then another wave follow that. And so I mean the communication thing. I mean, to be honest, in the sources that I've read, they make more of a joke about it than really anything serious. They laugh at each other's pronunciations and accents and that sort of thing. So
great. Well, by way of closing this up, let's answer the question Simon Sobolewski just asked from the West Coast. So which German will our commands be in? Our German will be taken from the PER manual as minimally butchered by me as possible. So, and we will talk in a little bit here about how you can start hearing some of that. Ed says, it's an interesting point about expat German communities creating German unity before Germany managed it. And interesting conversation right there, Ed. So, Robert Kronig says, my people were both Scot and German, so no one could understand each other. Fun. Well, let's use it as a way of transition, gang. Let's move on. Bottom line, we don't know for sure on everything, but this is what the evidence says. Andrew, do you want to start walking us through the evidence that we have and sort of push us through this in an efficient manner?
Yep, we'll just go from the general to the very specific. So starting out, a guy named Wilhelm Fock, 24th Illinois. He was a 48er. He knew Willich really well, and after the war, he makes a speech to the Military Order of the Loyal Legion, and he says, the fact is the 9th Ohio and the 32nd Indiana, as well as other German troops, were drilled and commanded by their officers in undefiled High Dutch and never learned the English drill at all. This is him speaking in English. The very bugle calls which summoned them to their brilliant and resistless attacks were German, unknown to the other troops, and the soul-stirring hurrahs which they went into battle were unmistakable, deep, and sonorous Teutonic sounds. So that's somebody who, they served in a different division, so they weren't, exactly side by side. But if we look at two regiments that served basically their entire service outside of West Virginia with the 9th Ohio, the 35th Ohio and the 2nd Minnesota, they say very specifically the commands were always given in German using the Prussian drill. The manual and tactics were those of the German army, as many of their officers had seen service there. And so you note there, it doesn't say it was Hardee's, but it was in German, or it was Hardee's with commands in English and descriptions in German. Go ahead.
Importantly, too, that is from Colonel Bishop, who is the commander of the 2nd Minnesota. This isn't just some Joe Schmo.
Right.
This is the actual regimental commander who is there at Chickamauga when the 9th and the 2nd Minnesota are charging across Kelly's Field together to save the left flank of the army. Like, this is a guy who knows exactly what the 9th Ohio is doing in battle.
And for those of you watching as well as listening, even though you see Brigadier General straps on his shoulder, this is Colonel Bishop, as later promoted to Brigadier General. So...
Yeah, so moving to the 9th Ohio specifically, and I'm going to talk about them first because there isn't a whole lot of evidence of exactly what it was, but if you look at the body of evidence and the clues, it gives you some ideas. So, again, the 9th Ohio, they had a different idea of what citizen soldier meant. They would often supplement or replace the drill with the Turner exercises, and the native-born American style of drill bored them. They talked about the grand dress parades that they would constantly do, and inspections, and it didn't hold any interest for them or enthusiasm at all.
Time out. Wait a second, Andrew. You're saying that inspection and dress parade are not interesting to men standing in the ranks? Is that maybe some place we can catch up on things here?
So, I already mentioned McCook and his sort of, the things that he would do to get out of drill and that sort of thing, threatening to take them home and all that. There was an inspection in West Virginia by George McClellan, and the native-born officers in the brigade or in the division actually went up to him and complained, and these guys are giving German commands. Are you going to allow that? And he makes the comment, look, the commands are the shortest I've ever heard. The best commands are the ones that are the easiest to understand.
And let's be fair, McClellan is the guy who knows this too. McClellan is one of the official U.S. Army observers, not only to the Crimean War, but the whole of Europe. So not only did he go see the French and the British and the Turks and the Russians fighting in Crimea, which had some real ups and downs for those services, but then he also went to Prussia, which this is when Prussia is starting to put together the army that goes on to conquer Central Europe, create its own empire, beats the Danes, the Austrians, and the French within a decade. So McClellan has a pretty good idea of what is what with Army drill going into the war. There is a reason that they picked him to be a major general and to put together the Army of the Potomac.
Yeah.
Now, he wasn't the greatest commander ever, but he did know how to train and organize troops.
Absolutely. I can say, and unfortunately, I'm here in Chicago and not at home, because at home I have an original copy of the report McClellan filed to the American government, and I meant to have that with us this evening and some photos from it, and just didn't get it done. Andy, before I let you go on, Elsie Gam says Turner drill equals Deutsche CrossFit. Ed Wilson says, "Oh, for a Taub when you need him." That being our friend Jim Taub.
To be fair, Ed, Jim has been consulted on this topic at various points in the research for this episode or this live stream.
And for those of you who may not be up to speed, Andy, Jim, and I did some live streams last summer during the heaviest of the lockdown for Civil War Digital Digest. Huck Green says, it seems like there might be a challenge here. Drill and inspections, no Huck to be found. So, let's keep heading on. Let's talk about the Birch letter to the Volksfreund. Andrew.
Yeah, he's referencing this inspection that's coming up with McClellan, and they're very concerned. Everybody in the regiment, he says, is very concerned that we don't know whether we're going to be inspected in English or in German. And he says, the quote is, we were sworn in as a German regiment and with German command and drilled by the German system, and then in parentheses it says mostly the Prussian. And so that's why we decided to, we'll start with the Prussian manual and sort of work back and see what doesn't work with what we're trying to do. And the other thing is, in some of his letters, the book A German Hurrah by Joe Reinhardt, it's a fantastic book, great translation. There are a few parts, though, where they're talking about a skirmish, and the use of the word Zug, Z-U-G, in German, the way it's translated there is a train, sort of a chain of skirmishers, I believe, and this word can mean so many different things. It can mean a train. It can mean, it can even mean a campaign. But in this specific instance, looking at the other words that they use, and specifically the word unterstützen and Unterstützungstruppen, that is describing the skirmishers going out, and then the Unterstützungstruppen are sort of an intermediate body. I guess we would call them the reserve for the skirmishers to, sort of protect the main line from getting overrun. And so, it's worth, I guess the reason I point that out is it's worth looking at the original German when seeing these these translations, and so that's one of the things that I ran into with translating Die Neuner, and this here with a German hurrah.
So, Andrew, I'll cut in here. Everybody is seeing the vocab slide. So, Zug, Schützenzag, Unterschützen, Unterstützungstrupp. And Eric, I know you said it was your favorite line of the night, but I'm going to continue to say as minimally butchered by me. But here's a chance to take a look at how it's spelling and hear Andrew go ahead and say it. So that's a great thing there. But go ahead, Andy.
Well, and I think that this is one of the things that really speaks to us is things like understanding the nuance of Zug, because not only is it platoon, but as we see also in the reference of a train, it also gets referred to, as we've discovered, as like column of what we think of as a column of companies or column of platoons. And so it's one of those things that where someone doing the translation, who did the translation for We Were the Ninth, if you're not familiar, it's not enough to just be able to speak German, to be able to understand the context of this manual and context of the primary source in German and translate it. So that's where it gets to a higher level of understanding of, any historian looking at a primary source has to understand the context of the primary source. But now you're having to understand that and translate it at the same time. And that's definitely a spot where it's easy to lose some of that meaning from it and to just gloss over and be like, they did German drill or they did German commands, and not understand that there's clear evidence in the language, the German language, that this is Prussian drill being used on American battlefields.
Great.
Yeah, and the translation, it makes perfect sense as written. And so it really is just a nuance, to find in the translation. But the most specific evidence that there is, if you don't mind my moving on, is the 32nd Indiana. There is a regimental, or it's actually a brigade order in August 61 that says, as you guys said, that they needed to be using Hardys at the regimental level and Scots at the brigade level. But when you continue to, again, read the specific vocabulary that they used, and there's a really nice quote that I'll get to here in a moment, it doesn't seem like Prussianisms to me. It seems like the Prussian drill or some form of it. Of course, they used the bugle calls. They were engaged in December of 61 at Rowlett Station against Terry's Texas Rangers. And they were, kind of surprised. Half of the regiment was across the river. And so what ended up happening was sort of a running fight between, first it was 2 and then 4 and then 8 companies. And the companies were basically working independently. And when you look at the vocabulary around the bugle calls that they used, of course, those are a sign of the Prussian drill. But there's also a description that Willich says in his official report, where he says, we fell in the usual manner at alarm in closed column, which what do we do when the long roll sounds? We fall in on the colors, right? Like this is not a normal thing. And then again, they use descriptions in the battle with Zug and the Unterstützungstruppen. Then when we move further to Shiloh, this is probably the clearest example that you'll find. Again, it's the same vocabulary, the bugle calls and that sort of thing, but they perform what seems to be a classic Prussian maneuver. They throw out strong lines of skirmishers. And then the main body of troops forms behind them in a easily maneuverable, tightly packed charging column. And then the skirmishers would determine a weak point in the enemy lines, and then you realign the charging column to exploit the weak point, and you send the bayonet chargers while the skirmishers then, file in behind. And then once you've performed the bayonet charge, you then deploy skirmishers or companies to the flanks and reform the main body. So the vocabulary for the commands in Joe Reinhardt wrote August Willich's or edited August Willich's Gallant Dutchman about the 32nd Indiana, and those commands are very similar. But the clearest example comes from the newspaper, the Westliche Blätter, which was a German language newspaper after the war. And this is actually a memorial to Willich, and it describes the course of the battle. And at one point it says, and again, this is a translation, so I left the important parts in German. But it says, at last, over the clangor of the battle, it sounded out, Gewehr zur Attacke rechts, Feldgewehr, Marsch, Marsch. And before the German hurrah had even faded away, the command was already sounding, rechts und links deployiert, Marsch, Marsch, Rottenfeuer. Now, those commands don't match any English manual. And what you have, when you translate it, the first command, Gewehr zur Attacke rechts, or the actual command is zur Attacke, I don't have it on the screen right now, but when you look at the command, what it's saying is you're moving the musket from the left to the right shoulder. So at the very least, they're not doing Hardies like they were ordered to in August '61, because unless they're carrying it in support arms, I guess. And then you have this Marsch Marsch, which is actually the Prussian command to change to a charging cadence.
I was going to say, you can say, Ed just asked that. Marsch Marsch. Is it a specific cadence, almost a trot? So there you go, Ed.
I mean, I think it's the rough equivalent of like a double quick time or something in a French-based manual like Hardee's or Casey's, right?
Well, what's interesting about, not to get too much into it, but what's interesting about the Prussian manual is that their regular march cadence is 108 paces a minute. And the Marsch Marsch, the charging tempo, or the trot they call it, is 120. So it's not much faster.
Now let me pull you back, and it's not much faster at all, because in Hardee's and Casey's, quick time, which is the standard marching cadence. Remember, common time is only for elementary education. Quick time is 110 beats a minute, and double quick time is 165. So you're right. You change the stride length as well. But so in the Prussian manual, the charge is not ridiculously faster as compared to the American. It's actually very similar. I can also say this, having had to keep many things in mind over my life, trying to keep 110 beats a minute for Civil War in my mind in college, while I was marching in the Spartan Marching Band, where our street parade cadence was 117 beats a minute. The difference between those is about the same distance. It's between the two Prussian speeds, between Marsch and Marsch Marsch. There's not that much difference there, gang.
Right.
So, Let's keep this going as we're heading late into the evening, fellas. Let me just turn back into the comments a bit again. Logan Culbertson is joining us this evening. He says, can't make it to this event, but this is some awesome stuff. Very interesting listening to while I prepare gear for Last Letter Home and Rosecrans. Logan, some of us will see you at each of those events, so we'll miss you here, and hopefully you can hit another one. Rob Carter said that we can come do the German regiment of the German company of the Garibaldi Guard at Harper's Ferry after this event, so we'll be welcome to do other living histories here. So Brandon Egan asked, will this event be commands be all in German? Brandon, since not many of us are completely fluent in German, what you'll do in camp will depend on your level of fluency. We will do our best to do, well, not our best, we will do all commands in German. Education of how the drill works will be in a language that you can understand. There's no reason for me to let Andrew come up front and be a drill master spouting off in German if I can't even keep up with him. So we'll find a great balance between that to give you the best experience possible and still not let you completely blindly trying to figure out what you're doing.
I mean, I think it's important to point out all three of us have some degree of fluency in German, have studied at some point in college, but we are purposely making sure this is an event that even if you don't speak German, you will be able to be there. And just in the same way that you associate a bugle call and know that, hey, that's officer's call or first sergeant's call, you will hear a bugle call and shouldn't be able to understand what that command means.
Yep. And Rob Carter says, but Garibaldi pace is the 180 pace step. Rob, you're on your own. We're gonna go ahead and pour Trey civilians in Harper's Ferry and watch you guys go screaming on by. So let's take this in focus. As we're about 50 minutes in. Glad you guys are enjoying. We still have a whole chunk of you here. Let's turn to the hallmarks of PER and what the focus is real quick, Andrew, and just sort of put this together. And so this is a setup of what PER is known for, and then we'll talk about how we're going to interpret it.
Yep. A lot of it we've already spoken about. The first thing is that the focus is on the battalion as opposed to the regiment. A Prussian battalion was 4 companies. From the way that I understand it, the 9th Ohio, they definitely operated in 2 battalions very often. And when the regiment was formed, they make a comment in Neuner at the very beginning where they say, we had 8 companies and we were ready to go, and then found out that you needed 10 companies to form a regiment. And so we added the Lafayette Guard and another militia regiment company to the drill. And when they added them, they didn't add them as 9th and 10th Company. They added them as 5th and 10th Company. And so that makes me think that they added, that they operated as 2 5-company battalions. And another thing, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and probably to make that synonymous with how our American understanding is, be more wings, because this is obviously not in the way of, let's be fair, in the Civil War, the only regiments that operate with multi-battalion regiments are the 9 new Army regiments of the regular Army, none of which actually got to 3 battalions. There are a few like the 12th Infantry or the 17th Infantry that had 2 battalions at one time, and they sometimes operated as separate battalions, even in the same brigade, but that was pretty rare. Functionally, they mostly were only able to field 1 battalion anyway.
Right, and so the other thing that they've maybe not necessarily focused on, but given that the officers and the NCOs had previous experience, there wasn't, from the Prussian army, there wasn't a whole lot of military actions going on in the time of 1848 to 1860. But when you look at the stuff that happened during 1848, 1849, they would have had a lot of practical experience working with individual company drill and operating that company entirely on its own. And the bugle system that they used works hand in hand with that. Each company has its own designating call. and they have calls that are specified for, hey, we're in trouble. And so if you hear that, you blow your company's call to say, hey, Fifth Company is here. And, they had a very unique and ingenious communication system all worked out. The usage of Feldmusik or field music, they looked down on the fife and drum. They only used it when they had to. So the band was the way that they really sort of, kept in step or whatever. The drummers, during drill and that sort of thing, they would keep cadence. They would give a few calls during the march, but based on a lot of the research of Christian Wolff and his gang over with the 1848, 1849, there are no field duty calls that we know of outside of Reveille and Zapfenstreich or Tattoo. All of the field duties were expected to be communicated verbally by the Unteroffizier, the sergeants. They were expected to be close with their men, and anything important enough to call the men out in haste would be done by a variety of bugle calls. And then we talked about the heavy skirmish formations, and the bayonet charge for the PER and definitely for the 9th Ohio was a feature, not a bug. It was definitely something that they weren't into the stand-up fight. It was one or two volleys and then off we go with nearly every engagement that they were in.
Well, and I think one thing to bear in mind that the PER itself is meant for a different weapon system than we're using in the Civil War. That is worth keeping in mind that the Germans at the time have a bolt-action, breech-loading, single-shot rifle, the Dresden needle gun, right? So their skirmishers are able to put up a much higher rate of fire. So that also says, too, that it also makes sense why they're not interested in standing in a battle line, because they don't have to mass their men to mass the fire as much as musket or rifle musket-armed troops have to. But, I think it also kind of speaks to that in the late 19th century, there's this big idea of the elan of the attack. The French famously really adopted after the Franco-Prussian War, but in a lot of response to what the Germans are doing with this attack. It's a very attack-oriented tactical system, which has its strengths and weaknesses, but it's really interesting that the 9th's default position, even in a defensive position, is a short, limited counterattack, which sometimes, like Chickamauga, turns into a possibly overextension of a counterattack.
A little bit.
Yep. So let's keep going here. Mike Comer, I see your question. I think it's a great one. We'll handle that as we get near the end here. Andrew, if you want to just wrap up a little about PER, the marching formation versus battle formation.
Well, from my understanding, unless you're we'll say maneuvering on the battlefield, they would use that tight compact marching column. As far as I know, doubled on the center there. They refer to in the pursuit after their bayonet charge in Mill Springs, they do the entire pursuit like 2 miles in a line of battle, and they refer to it as an absurd formation. And so, based on the research, it seems like the line of battle was not really their cup of tea, or we'll say stein of beer.
Yeah, there you go. And as we do that, I've got the slide, Andy and Andrew, up from the skirmish line that shows the 2 columns from the battalion with the skirmish line in front. And the one thing I'll note is they do it a little bit differently, but if you're functional at all in Casey's tactics, this smells an awful lot like double column. And I know Andy and I are both big fans of using double column in the field whenever possible. So we both looked at that and went, there. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, but interestingly, too, keeping the sections that were stricken out of Casey's when it was written, the original interpretation of Casey's is that 1st and 10th Company are your skirmish company, which if you're looking at this in these companies, you see it's 1 through 8, and then there's platoons at the end that are your skirmish platoons.
Well,
so that
you say, and
this is a little bit different because this is talking specifically about the 3-rank formation, and so you'll see on there that those are it's the Schützenzug, and those were the skirmishers.
Sure. Casey addressed it, though, instead of taking men from each company and a little bit of men for each company, he just had 2 companies that were supposed to be skirmishers, though the War Department just said, we're not going to do that.
Yep, and if you're not deep in Casey's gang, but you want to look at what Andy's talking about, crack a copy of Casey's battalion drill and look for the paragraphs that have an O in front of the number. It'll be O dash whatever the number is. That's not 0, that is the letter O for omitted. And so, but there's a way to take a look at what Andy's talking about if you're interested but don't know offhand what he's talking about there. So, before we transition over to how to implement this, let me throw a question up, Andrew, and see if you're able to swing at it. I know Rob Carter's already made a comment in the comment section about it. Mike Comer says, you keep speaking about the Prussian manual, so what did other German armies use as drill manuals? Did the Saxons or Bavarians have manuals that were very different, or were they all similar?
Now, it seems like they were... They were definitely different in language used, and that's how other than the specific references to the Prussian style, that's sort of how we decided on the Prussian manual is the commands fit almost exactly to what's in the primary sources. But yeah, I mean, there is a Hanoverian manual. There's a Bavarian manual that I'm aware of. I haven't, to be honest, looked too deep into them. But I will say, when I was talking to Christian, trying to prepare, for this live stream, when I read him the quote about, we fashioned it after the German system, mostly the Prussian, he started laughing. So maybe they're a lot more different than I'm thinking. I don't know, but yeah, that's my answer.
Maybe worth a conversation with Christian, and we can sort of something maybe to circle back on at the post level on the event page. So,
well, and I wonder to what extent too. Like, let's be fair, this is in the middle of Prussia taking hegemony over northern and western Germany. That these people from the smaller principality, Westphalia or something like that, understood that the Prussians had a superior system. I mean, like Andrew said, the evidence from the primary sources, the quotations matches up to the PER enough where it's obvious that is what they're referencing, on top of just the generic Prussian drill references. So, I mean, maybe these people like, hey, if you recognize that this is the baddest, meanest set of drill on the block, why aren't you using it?
Absolutely. So, well, let me, okay, Rob Carter, it gets super fun when you switch to Italian and get the Piedmont, Sardinian, Austrian-Italian, Neapolitan, and Papal States. Yes, Papal States manuals. We will save that for another event, Rob, but it would be fun to get a dig into. Let's do this, gang. We've been going for a little over an hour. I have to work early in the morning. Andy's in a helicopter flying early in the morning. Let's turn towards the practical. We've talked a lot about the history and the how-to and the wherefore. Let's talk about how we're going to go from today up until the second weekend in August and interpret the 9th Ohio at Carnifax Ferry for de Neuner. Let's talk about how we're going to help you guys come along with us and have a good experience, or those of you who can't be with us have a chance to dig into this a little bit further. Andrew, let me let you take the first bullet point, and then let me take the second one. So go ahead, and if you want to hit that first bullet point in our edits there.
I think I lost my place. I'm sorry. You can go ahead with your point if you
sure.
like.
Okay. That is one of the things we need to do. And everybody said, hey, Brandon said it earlier this evening. How are we gonna speak all German? Are we not? How are we going to do this? Coming up in the next 2 months, I think, on Civil War Digital Digest, you will actually hear Andrew's face, because Andy and I are going to provide an episode out of digest time to help get ready for this in the larger context of understanding German immigrants and German-speaking folks as they served in the American Army. And that is, working with Andrew's help, we're going to do a visual German dictionary. We're going to look at the parts of your body, the parts of the firearm, and some common things that you see around camp, and you're going to get a chance to visually understand how to say it in German in a visual way. You're going to get a chance to watch the episode. This is a finger. This is the musket. This is the trigger, so that when somebody mentions it, it won't be totally new to you at De Neuner. These will be words you'll understand. You may not speak the whole German language, but if you hear somebody who does speaking it next to you, you're going to have a chance to understand a little bit better, so it can be a richer experience for you. Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing for the manual at this point?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we started with the 1847 PER, and the way, especially older German texts read, and this is a manual, so it's even worse. I mean, everything is in passive voice, and so we tried to simplify it and make it as instructional as possible for use by English-speaking living historians, people who have maybe a little bit of experience with the Civil War side of things, but not necessarily so much the German.
No, and I'll say this, gang. I've watched some of the videos that Andrew's been putting together. He's going to be sharing them on the De Neuner page, and we'll make sure they get on the Tuebor events page. There is no video in there to show, and Andrew and I are talking with Andy about how we can get across the bridge there down the road. But right now, the work he's done to take the plates that are in the manual and describe things so you can get a chance to start learning right away is really, really well done, and looking forward to sharing that. So, and then we'll work on some other drill stuff down the road. So, but getting ready for this event, we will have the German language dictionary shortly, and Andrew is going to start releasing in order of priority from how to stand at attention to the manual of arms on the way down to inspection arms. There's going to be a series of videos coming out that will help you start to learn this. So.
And we're in the days, not weeks, time frame here. At this
Absolutely.
Point,
so because let's face it, we need time. We're going to learn a new manual and use it in August. We need time to get under our belts. And that's from me at the command of the three companies at the battalion that we're running, to the company commanders, to the sergeants, down to the enlisted men. We all need the chance to have the best experience there. Andy, I see you're chiming back in there with ethnic groups and talking about the Ulster Scots. How about everybody just hang on for a couple of weeks? We got some of those conversations coming. So. Gang, I'm going to just run us for about a minute more here. It's been great to see all the interaction from so many folks I know, a few folks I don't know. A lot of great questions. I'm going to keep it open here for just a couple of minutes more and see if there's any questions coming in. But we've talked about what the Prussian manual is, the why. You've met some of the personalities behind it, and you've had a chance. Andrew's really done a great job talking about the tenets of it, skirmish formations, working at the company level, the alignments, and then working with the bugle is a heavy thing. And these are things we're going to take into the De Neuner event so you can have part of that as an experience. Also reminds you that before we even march into the field, the regimental sutler is going to interact with the regiment, so we've got that. Ed just says, this is one I'll be watching with interest from afar. Ed, if you get shot, and I saw somebody earlier said they're getting their second shot, things are moving. Ed, if you want to come over, you're more than welcome. We've got Germans coming. Come on over. Hop a plane and come be with us. So Robert Kronig says, great information, really intriguing. Hey, Robert. The same thing. I'm going to borrow something from Brian Disrocher's. Register. Come on up and get the experience for it. So,
I mean, I want to say, guys, that, Andrew, thank you for bringing this up. Like, if you guys in the audience don't realize that this is something like I've been pushing with Andrew, that he needs to get this published in an actual academic setting. Like, this is the potentially, like, something that really redefines our understanding of German troops, especially in the Army of the Cumberland during the war. And, like, I'm glad that we got this chance to put this out here, because I really think that this is something that will be noted going forward as an interesting look into these units.
And that's not just a living history level. That is actually at a historian level you're speaking, Andy, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Yep. Yes. Yeah. Like published in a history book, magazine, journal, something like that.
Andrew, your wife Andrea is here, and she's very happy for you. So, hey, gang, there you go. Without further ado, we're going to let Andrew go back to Andrea. Andy and I are going to crash so we can both go to work in the morning, and we're going to wish you guys all very well. Thanks for spending a Saturday evening with Tuebor Historic Events. It's going to be a great event in a couple of weeks. Andy's got a tin mug. I've got my first century Roman cup. I saw Andrew with a beer hiding around there somewhere. We'll wish you all the best for the evening, and we'll talk to you shortly down the road. Take care now.